to work. You have to truly believe in the magic.
Hey Magic fans, I'm Mikey and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Magic, an Orlando Magic podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be joined by Keith Smith of Spotrac.com to talk about the Orlando Magic offseason, potential cap space, contract extensions, free agency, and more. But before we're joined by Keith, I'm pleased to spend some time with Sunderland's finest Mackem. Have I said that right?
You have, Mikey. You've got honorary status.
Away the lads. Evening,
How are you,
Gary.
lads?
How are you doing, mate?
All good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Mackem, for those who don't know, I think means resident of Sunderland.
Yeah, it's
Is
the
that
whole.
right?
It's based on shipbuilding.
Okay.
So it's slang for make them, because it's shipbuilding heritage.
Mackem.
Yeah, that's how
There
you
we
say
go.
it. Yeah, there you go. A bit of history for you on there.
Yeah, I thought I'd find some Sunderland slang for you
You've
for
done
tonight.
well. You've done well. I try and put it all about painting, mate. So or cider.
Or cider. Yeah,
Mhm.
there we go. I've got a few more talents than that, but
Just a few.
that's what sticks. That's what sticks. Unfortunately, we won't be joined by the Hoff or the Welshman tonight. G's at a wedding, so without doubt, probably about this sort of time, it's 7:45 on a Friday night. He'll be drunk, I'm sure, by now.
Oh, totally.
He'll be gone. And I'm sure Paul's enjoying a drink on his hollybob somewhere up in the
Yeah.
lakes. But yeah. Before we dive into the show, we just want to say a big thank you to our patrons for your incredible support. So thank you to Barry Conn, Paolo and Franz Warmth, Ollie Law, Gary Clark, Angus Craig, Dylan Holden, Alan Kane, Tom Stone, Mark Joss, Sean Moore, Liam Radbourne, Andy Lindley, Stuart Benzies, Drummy, and Podfather Phil loves Hazy Northwestern. If you're interested in joining our Patreon, we've got 3 tiers available with varying benefits. So visit patreon.com/Let's Talk Magic to join today. Okay, right, let's jump into our interview with Keith Smith. And this week, we welcome on a first-time guest, contributor and cap guru for Spotrac.com, formerly of Yahoo Sports, and Orlando resident Keith Smith. Keith, welcome to Let's Talk Magic. It's great to have you join us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I know we caught up earlier in the season trying to make this happen, but schedules didn't quite work out. But it's great to have you on. First off, Keith joined our friend Stephen Cameron from Orlando Magic HQ on his show, The Close Up, earlier this week to talk about the Magic offseason, the salary cap, differences in the new CBA. So if you haven't listened to that conversation yet, head over to their page and their podcast to check that out. But you and Stephen covered a lot, Keith. So I want to try and keep things a little bit different, maybe ask you a few different questions and dive in a little bit deeper to some of the stuff that you talked about with Stephen. But the Magic had a great regular season, really, finishing 5th in the East, 47-35, a significant improvement from the year before, 13 more wins. We had a top 5 defense for a long period of the season. Paolo Banchero became an all-star in just his second year. Jalen Suggs was voted second team all defense, and head coach Jamal Mosley was runner-up for coach of the year. Expectations changed as we went throughout the regular season. And we all know, though, but when you get to the playoffs, that really reveals your team's weaknesses. So first of all, what did you take away from the 7-game series against the Cleveland Cavaliers? And what do you think we've learned that maybe we didn't already know about this Magic team before the playoffs started?
I think we, more than learning new things, good or bad, I think it firmed up some of the things we knew to be more certain. I think we now fully know he's a superstar and he's ready to win at the highest levels. He was so good throughout the vast majority of that series that you could see he can be the best player on a playoff team without a doubt. And it's funny because I think we kind of knew that, or at least we hoped that's where it was going. Now we know that we can get there. I think we learned and know for certain now they don't have enough shooting. They don't have enough on-ball creation. We know they're tough. They're going to defend, and the defense will hold up in the postseason. And then I think this is a true learning is it's really, really hard to win in the playoffs. If you're not playing well, you're probably not going to win. Every once in a while, you might steal one. but that's going to happen maybe once in a 7-game series. If you're going to win 4 against a team, you're going to have to play pretty well in at least 3 games. And I think now the Magic, this young group, the vast majority of which had never been there, now they know, hey, they talk about it, right? And everybody can hammer it home of you have to value the ball. Every possession means more and all those things. You just don't feel it until you're on the floor there. So I think that's stuff that kind of really is either new or firmed up in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. The Magic were expected to be a play-in team at the start of the season, and really we were one half away from being in the second round of the playoffs. Do you think Jeff Weltman's off-season plans have changed in any sort of way, given the way the season's gone and making the playoffs instead of just being a play-in tournament team?
It's a really good question. I think one of the dangers with the team is thinking you're closer than you are and going all in too early. I'm not really worried about that with Jeff Weltman. I'm actually more worried that it could go the other way, that he doesn't push in enough, that there's a little bit more of a, we can still be patient for another year or two, and we can really watch these guys grow. And the problem with that is the NBA, it's like Ferris Bueller says, life comes at you pretty fast sometimes, right? Like it really does. Like you have to be ready to go. I realize I'm showing my age there with quoting the movie from the 80s.
Great film.
So it's you're really in a spot where I think with the Magic is Franz needs paid soon. Jalen Suggs needs paid soon. Paolo needs paid right on the heels of those guys. And if you don't go get the guys now, it's not going to get any easier to get them later. I'm not saying it is, let's trade every pick we have and all the swap rights and trade 2 of the young guys and go get another guy. I don't know that they need to do that, but you can't just internal growth is enough. We'll supplement with a veteran addition here, veteran addition there. I think there is a window here. Let's go really get somebody who can really help propel this thing forward and get there. Where if we were having this conversation a year ago, I probably would have said, I'm all right with pumping the brakes a little bit. Let's see, is this, because really it was the first third of 2 seasons ago was such a mess. Then they played really good for the final 2 thirds, and they were in contention for the play-in tournament pretty late in the year. But there's still a sense of, all right, is that fully real? Do I want to buy that? Now we know, all right, this seems pretty good. Like they can get there. The other thing why I'm saying you gotta go a little bit right now is a lot of teams in the East they're not coming back to you. Meaning Philly is gonna get better this summer. They with all that cap space, they're gonna add guys. Cleveland, even if Cleveland's gonna go through, I think, a summer of adjustment, they're still in pretty good shape to be a pretty good team. So you've got a lot of stuff you have to work through with the teams around you in the standings too, that you don't want to get kind of just caught standing and watching.
Yeah. So it's interesting you're saying that, Keith, because like I'm going to ask you basically, what do you think the biggest areas of need are? Because in the Magic fan base, there's some who would say we should go for example, a max free agent like Paul George. Others are wanting moves, slightly smaller moves like Malik Monk, consolidate, be patient, make a blockbuster deal for someone like Trae Young. So what's your thoughts on what the Magic should do?
My overarching thought is it's pretty great that they're in position to, all those things are fairly realistic paths, right? None of the things you just mentioned are things where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe in dreamland that can happen. Like this is really like, these could all be real things that could happen because one, they've got the assets to go make it happen. They've got the cap flexibility. They are a good team. So you're not like a year ago adding Trae Young would have been like, why? Like what, like, why are we doing this now? It would have been now. Okay, sure. If you think he's the guy, whether it be Trae Young, Darius Garland, he's the other name I hear mentioned quite a bit through trade. Those are the guys. Yeah, sure. If you want to go that path, that's fine. Here's my big thing, and this is a bit of a cop-out answer because I'm not going to give you a direct, this is what they should do. Because the real reason is I don't really know, to be quite honest. I'm not there yet myself, is whatever path you do take, especially if it is a player acquisition path, you have to be 100% certain that guy fits and works with Paolo and with Franz. Those are your 2 kind of organizational pillars right now. I think in a perfect world, Franz would be your 3rd best player because I think he then is an overqualified 3rd best player instead of he's good as a 2nd best guy, but as an overqualified 3rd guy, you'd be in a really good shape. But I don't want to bring in, this is where a guy like Trae Young gets tricky. You bring in Trae Young. Trae Young is a pretty heliocentric guy. He needs the ball a lot. Every touch he gets is a touch that comes away likely from Paolo and Franz. Every additional touch he gets over Markelle Fultz or Gary Harris or whoever it is in theory he'd be replacing. In addition, you're also taking some shots and touches away from Jalen Suggs. And I think part of the reason Jalen Suggs was so good this season was Jalen Suggs was not a go spot up in the corner and maybe the ball will come to you every once in a while offensive player. He was super engaged. He was a big part of the offense, which then turned into, I think, allowed him to be a big part of the defense as well. More than a big part. He was like the best defensive player on the team on a very good defensive team. So I think you just have to be very, very careful that you get the right player, because in some ways you get one shot at this. Because if you make the big trade or you make the big free agent signing, there goes your cap space, there goes your trade assets, and you're out. And if you get it wrong, guess where we're headed? Probably not all the way back to the bottom. We're headed back to, man, this team was on the rise, and now they're battling in the play-in tournament and those kind of things. And that's not where I want to see them fall back to.
Yeah. Yeah,
did I do a pretty good job of riding the fence there and not really answering your question?
Awesome answer. And it's interesting what you said, because me and Mikey's had this conversation before, and we said if we're ever in a situation where Franz Wagner is the third offensive option on the Magic are very, very, very good.
Yep. Especially if he refines his jump shot wherever that went. I think he left it at the World Cup. I don't know what happened. And I here's my thing with that too, because you guys didn't ask, but I'll offer it up anyway. I think he looked tired for large chunks of the season. Unfortunately, this summer's not going to be any easier on him because he's got the Olympics, and he's obviously, if not he is maybe the key player on the German national team. So I am a little worried about that, but his history as a shooter tells me he's not a 28% or whatever it was that he finished. That's not where he is as a shooter. And I think if you got him someone who could just make it a little easier on him, let him spot up once in a while. Not everything has to be an off the dribble created shot. I think life would be a lot easier on him that way too.
Yeah. And if we forget about Game 7 against the Cavaliers, he had a pretty good series all in all in the first 6 games. And I think it was Game 4 where he went off for 30 plus, and he looked like Franz that we were used to, that we saw a lot of last season as well. But the Magic, Keith, are obviously in a great position this offseason and potentially next as well. I know there's basically a 2-year window that the Magic have got to decide how they're going to use some of this cap space. But I think the Magic have about 66 million in guaranteed money this year. They could clear a big chunk of cap space. I think you were saying on Orlando Magic HQ that you're conservatively you were projecting us to be around 25 million, but they could clear up to 50 to 60 if they really wanted to. But the Magic are facing a situation where obviously this summer Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs are both due contracts or are eligible for contract extensions. Banchero will be next year. How much a year do you see the three of them eventually getting, and how do you think that affects the Magic's salary cap going forwards?
Sure, yeah. So let's start with Banchero because he's the easy one. He's going to get the full max. It's either going to be a 25% of the cap max or ideally a 30%. And as much as it sounds nice to have the balance of, hey, let's get him on the lower number, you really want him at the 30 because that means he's an all-NBA guy. I'm going to be realistic. I don't think he's going to win MVP or defense. Pretty sure he's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year either. He's not that he's a bad defender. He's just not that level of a defender.
Yeah.
So let's hope all NBA, that gets him the 30%. And there we are with that. So now if we're talking about him on a 30% of the cap max, I'm going to pull up my salary sheets here, which wouldn't start, to be very clear, until 26, 27. That's going to start at about 51 million. I think Franz next year, because of where the salary cap is headed, where we could project after this coming season, which should only have modest cap growth, probably somewhere in the range of 4 to 5%.
Yeah,
we feel pretty confident saying the cap's going to grow by 10% a year. And here's the important note within that: cap will grow by 10%. The max a max salary can go up by each year is 8%. And it's not even really a full 8% because it's really only 8% off the first year salary. Then it's whatever that number fixes to would be your raise per year. So let's say in the case with Franz, let's say they give him a 25% of the cap max, which would be next season, about not next season, meaning 24, 25. When we talk these things, if I say next season, I'm talking 25, 26.
When it kicks in.
Exactly. This season, I'm already into 24, 25, despite the fact that the playoffs and all that are going on. So Franz's new contract, 25, 26, kicks in at, we're projecting it to be about $38.88 million. What we would say there in that position is we would get him to 25% of the cap, but then the cap goes up 10%. His contract only goes up 8%. So by the end, that's going to be more like 21% of the cap, which is really not all that much. So I would say put him on a max. And then I would say Jalen Suggs, slightly less than a max, just because there's still the injury questions that have been open. This was really his first real healthy year this past year. And even then, he still had some stuff. And offense, he's still a work in progress, I think is fair to call it. I think he's a wonderful defensive player. I think he's better offensively than a lot of people gave him credit for. I think a lot of that came just played a lot more. He wasn't looking over his shoulder at all. He was really, in a really great role for himself. So now we're in a position where I think with Jalen Suggs, I'm going to say slightly below max. So let's say 30 million. So now flip that into the next year. He's probably at like 34. Wagner's at like 38, or let's call it 40, just to use even numbers. Those guys are at 70. Paolo's at 51 or whatever he said. So now you're already up over at 120 million. Those guys are going to eat up half your cap. That's generally how it goes. Like that's not the end of the world if you're there. And again, those deals will only look better as the cap continues to grow and if things get further down the line.
Sure.
So we've got our own free agents this off-season, Keith. Markel Fultz, Gary Harris, Goga Batadze, team option on Joe Ingles. How likely it is do you think that we see them back next season, and what would a smart addition from the Magic and free agency look like? So I know a lot, as I said, the Paul George, the Klay Thompsons are getting banded around, but what would a smart move look like?
Yeah, of the Magic's own free agents, I think there's a world where you could see Fultz and Harris back, but it's going to have to be on lesser contracts. Unless the one thing I don't want them to do is take kind of a rollover year where it's, hey, let's re-sign all these guys to basically 1-year contracts worth roughly what they made this year, a little bit more, and that's how we build the roster and we just run it back. I don't want to see them do that because I think you're just leaving too much optionality on the table with that. But if Fultz or Harris was willing to come back for less money, play a little bit of a lesser role, I think you could definitely see that be a thing. I don't think it will be. I think a guy like Ingles, that is definitely in play. I don't think he's going to get his option picked up because I think the Magic will decline his option with the idea of, hey, we're going to use our cap space. Then if we can give you $5 million in leftover cap space, $6 million, whatever, because let's face it, they overpaid him a little bit this year, which was fine. It was a fine overpay, and do that. Then Mo Wagner becomes a really interesting one to me because I project that they're going to decline his option, but I think that is with a idea of we're going to decline it because we already have something in place to bring you back. If nothing else, we'll use the $8 million room exception to bring you back on basically the exact same contract you would have been on anyway. And now we move it forward from there because he's obviously a key part of the bench for this team. But Tadze is the one who gets really interesting because I think there's a world where his future is kind of tied to what happens with Mo Wagner. They move Wendell Carter Jr. in a trade. I know that's been discussed out there as a potential guy they could move in a trade. That becomes really interesting for that. Now, if we get into who are like free agent targets that could make sense for this team, there's a handful of guys I think that could really make sense. And the nice thing is they can kind of go in a lot of different directions. Some of that is because Paolo and Franz are pretty versatile. Paolo, I think the one thing you don't need is a 4, right? I think we're all, I hope, at least hope, in agreement there. But you could do a point guard, you could do another wing, you could do a center if you wanted to go that way. I love Malik Monk as a target for the Magic because I think he fills a whole lot of needs. And I think there's a world where you could get Malik Monk and say you're starting, or you could get Malik Monk and say, hey, we're going to play off the bench, but it's still going to be 30 minutes a night off the bench, much like you did with the Kings. He would be pretty high on my target list there. I know a lot of people talk about point guards. I don't love the D'Angelo Russell fit as much as at least is being bandied about, I guess, in some corners. But I think a guy like Tyus Jones could make a ton of sense for the Magic. Pass first guy, just a reliable guy. He's not going to break the bank. Somebody who could come in. They don't want to bring back Gary Harris. I would take a look at maybe Gary Trent Jr. or Buddy Hield. Again, options that aren't going to break the bank. Yeah, if you really want to go spend, if you wanted to go spend a bunch of money and try to be in a spot where it is, hey, we are really going to try to lock teams down defensively, why not chase OG Anunoby, right? Really, really make it hard on the Knicks. Make it known, hey, OG, there's a max deal waiting for you or near max contract out here waiting for you. Try to chase him. Paul George, I get it, right? That one's a little bit tougher for me. I just don't trust his health track record. That's where I get a little nervous on that one with Paul George. And then Biggs, I'm not going to run through all the options because I think if you wanted to go for a center, there's like 10 that make a ton of sense if that's the direction they want to go. And a lot of them I come back to saying, I'd probably just keep Carter, Wagner, and Patadze and just kind of run forward with that group because I think they're pretty solid.
Yeah. I think all these options, Keith, there isn't necessarily one target out there who fits perfectly. There's a downside to a lot of these players. I think Malik Monk's definitely an interesting name. It's certainly somebody we discussed on recent episodes, and I think a consensus pick, if you look at Magic fans online, I think if Malik Monk is the guy that the Magic go and throw a bit of money at this summer, I think most Magic fans will be pretty satisfied as the start to make a jump next season. But like you said, Tyus Jones, I think he would really settle things down offensively and help the Magic get into sets on that end of the floor. But obviously he hasn't got the size and the wingspan and the things that Jeff Weltman likes on the other end as well. So there's pros and cons of all these players. But
I will say, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to real quick.
Sorry.
I think there is a world where the Magic can afford to bring in one weaker defender because the rest of the defense is so solid. As long as it's not going to be somebody who is a complete non-competitive, they're a turnstile out there. As long as it's somebody who will at least play with effort and execute in the scheme, I think you can afford to do that because that's probably not going to be a major problem for you until you get to the playoffs. And at that point, hopefully you built enough versatility in where you could go to some other stuff if you really needed to. So that's where I'm not too worried if it's like, this guy's not really the kind of defender that they want at this position. Okay, but can he do a whole bunch of other stuff that would really help? All right, well then, you got to sacrifice a little bit somewhere sometimes.
You've got a roster that can cover up weaknesses for others. Absolutely. We could talk about names all day, but that's for a later date as we get further into the offseason. Keith, how do you think the NBA draft likely features in all of this as well? Because the Magic own the 18th and the 47th picks this year. The roster's already one of the youngest in the league. I'm sure a lot of Magic fans like me are all hoping to see Anthony Black become part of a regular rotation next season. Jett Howard hopefully thrusted into that role as well. But is adding another cost-controlled rookie a good idea? Maybe we see a similar approach potentially, drafting a guy, stashing him in the G League like we saw them do with Jett Howard this year. From all accounts, it makes a change this summer because the Magic are further down the draft and we're not just focused on that. But by all accounts, there's a lot of players in this draft class who are potentially good role players that teams will be looking at. How do you see it all playing out? How do you think the Magic will use the draft this year?
Yeah, I've joked with people who cover the team and said, you got to learn a whole lot more names this year than you usually do. Normally you get to know maybe 10 guys. Now you better know at least 20 or so to feel comfortable about it. But that's a good place to be in, right? You'd rather have to do a little bit more work. I think so here's the challenge. There's one of two things you're going to get at that position with this particular draft. You're either going to get an older player who is more of a finished product, but can come in and help right away, or you're going to get a mystery box of upside of let's hope, right? And that's where I would almost lean maybe towards a slightly older player who's ready to come in and help, because I think you've already got your lottery tickets on the roster a little bit in Anthony Black, who I'm going to pause here to say, I think Anthony Black's better than a lot of people give him credit for. I thought he played pretty well as a rookie. There were moments where I was like, you could throw him in the playoffs and he'd probably be okay. My favorite thing was his first month and a half of the year, he'd catch the ball on the wing, and it was like not even a record scratch. It was the record stopped. Like the music stopped, and everybody was like, ugh, like, because everything just paused. He didn't know what to do. Catch it, he'd hold it, he'd be like, or where's my screen coming from? Where's the defense? About 2 months into the season, it was, I'm going to let it fly, or I'm going to put it right on the floor. I know right the action I'm flowing into. He's got great size. He's a good defender. Actually shot it better than I think anybody thought he would. Still pretty small sample size, but that's encouraging. So that's my way saying I'm a big fan. Jett Howard, a little less so. Didn't really get a chance to show much. What I'm a little more worried about was Jett Howard wasn't completely and utterly dominant on the G League level. He was good, don't get me wrong, but you kind of want to see as a first-round pick, especially a lottery pick. If you're spending the year in the G League, you should be 30 points pretty regularly, dominating the G League and coming forward. So big summer for him, coming with Summer League and then a big summer of work to come. I'm not going to write him off. He was a very young player first year in the league.
Yeah.
So I'm a little more in favor of maybe go for the slightly older player at that position in the draft. On my personal board, around that point, that gets you in the range of, do you want to go for Zach Edey? Do you want to go that direction? What about a guy like Baylor Shireman from Creighton, who at the very least is going to shoot and be a pretty good ball mover? Bobby Clintman, who played a year in college and then went and played in Australia. He's somebody I think could come in and help and not be really such a younger project. And Kyle Filipowski is more of a finished product if you wanted to go back to the Duke pipeline and go with another big in those spots. Those are the guys I kind of think could be in range for the Magic. I tend to think they'll probably, I don't know, who has the longest wingspan and the most physical upside, and that's probably who they'll go after, which it's kind of hard to, criticize. It's worked out fairly well to this point, and I know that's an easy joke to make, but I think there's some truth in that too. There's probably just going to be not necessarily the best player available right now, but this is who we think will be the best player available when all is said and done, and I think that's probably the direction they go, because it's just not this kind of draft where you're like, there's their guy. There he is. That's the guy we got to get.
Yeah. Yeah. Whilst you mentioned about Anthony Black, I'm a big AB fan. And I think there's a lot of Magic fans that are kind of discounting him, they're sort of forgetting about him, that we all know that point guard's a position of need in the long term. I still think Anthony Black fits that mold. I mean, he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he loves playing defense. If he can continue working on his 3-point shot, we've seen the flashes of his passing ability this season as well. Small sample size, but I think AB long term could still be the answer at point guard. We just got to be patient with him for sure. But
I think there's a world where Jamal Mosley, like late at night, he's trying to fall asleep and he like dreams of Anthony Black, Jalen Suggs, like terrorizing opposing backcourts for 94 feet. And he's like, I'm going to sleep well. And he rolls over with a smile on his face and goes to bed, right? Because it's just where you could get to. Like I'm a big Anthony Black fan too. I think he's going to be really, really good at some point. That's why I'm a little worried if they go with, if you go with a Darius Garland, who would be a multi-year option at point guard, I almost kind of want to, let's either in that
almost
trade
spells the
or
end
in
for
another,
him almost.
Yeah, like let's explore the trade market for AB, just because I don't know that it's going to happen then. Like, and I don't, because you're still going to have Cole Anthony, who I think Cole Anthony, this between the regular season and the playoffs really taught us his upside is high scoring 6-man, which to be quite honest, I know some people think that's an insulting thing to say. I don't see it that way. Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams had 20-year careers playing off the bench as scoring guards. I think you could absolutely do that and be in just fine shape. So I'm hopeful that's if they do bring in a point guard, let's maybe look at moving Anthony Black somewhere then where he can play. Maybe he's part of the trade package if that's the way.
How do you feel about one of the things we discussed last week was how do you feel about them maybe, like say if Chris Paul gets bought out by the Warriors and becomes a free agent, how do you think about bringing in a veteran point guard to maybe run the show for another year or two, and whilst Anthony Black continues to develop behind him?
Yeah, I don't hate it. I think that's a perfectly fine route to go. Chris Paul's a little. I think that's
That's
a little
just an
pipe dreamy.
example, but
yeah, it's. But I've gotten that same question from Magic fans, as I'm out and about or just online. People will say like, "Hey, could they get Chris Paul? I think the Warriors. I read they're going to waive him and all that. I don't know that he wants to play on the East Coast. I think that's the bigger problem. I think his entire life and family is on the West Coast, so I think he's going to do what he can to stay out that way. But yeah, that kind of idea I'm perfectly fine with. That's where I think a Tyus Jones could make a lot of sense. And I have no problem even if Tyus Jones, if what it takes is, hey, we had to pay him $20 million each of the next 2 seasons. All right, that's fine. I'm not gonna lose sleep over that. Like that's perfectly fine. He comes in, let Anthony Black get a little more seasoning, let Jalen Suggs learn a little bit more how to be an on-ball distributor and those kind of things. And Tyus Jones, most importantly, or even like Chris Paul at this point in his career, those guys are not going to come in and say, all right, Paolo, go stand in the corner. I got this. That's where I'm a little worried with some of the other options I hear thrown out there. I think you want a point guard who can set the offense and then play off Paolo and Franz as they do most of the creating.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to have Jeff Weltman's headaches on this because I can imagine he's not sleeping as well as Jamal Mosley. But if we were looking, obviously the playoffs are going on now. We've seen Denver eliminated. We're going to have a new champion again, 7th straight year. Who have you enjoyed watching the most, Keith? And what's your predictions for the conference finals? And who do you think is going to win everything?
I mean, I'd be lying if it was anybody but what's on the hat. I am a
I'd say that.
Celtics kid. I grew up in Boston, so I'm a Celtics guy. That's it. My blood does run green, despite the fact that I've been in Orlando for a long time now. But I'm going to take them out of the mix from teams I've enjoyed because I have enjoyed them. I really liked that Knicks team. I liked how tough they were, how gritty they were, how much fight they shown. I thought the Timberwolves, this run has been incredible so far. I do think they're going to win. We're recording before game 2. I do think they'll win game 2 and even that series up. I'm big on the Wolves. It was fun watching the Magic in there. And I thought the fact that they had a good showing by pushing that to 7 games. I thought that was really cool to see. So yeah, it's been a really fun playoffs, even if some of the series have been kind of short because of injuries and the like. But it has been a fun playoffs. I've really enjoyed it.
How do you think the Celtics would have fared had the Magic beaten the Cavaliers in Game 7 and we would have faced you in round 2? Do you think they would have given you more of a problem?
Strictly because I think they would have been more healthy. I think they might have given the Celtics a little bit more of a problem. I think you saw this year in the games they played, Boston's defense is just at a slightly different level from where the Cavs defense was at. They had times they really struggled to score in the Cavs. It was going to be very hard for them to score. I think just their Celtics are very good at kind of, this is what you want to go to. You're not going to do that. We're going to take that away, and you're going to have to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of doing something different. And I'm just not sure the Magic were quite ready for that. I think it would have been more competitive just from the standpoint of they're healthier than the Cavs were by the time they got there. But I still think Boston would have got through them in probably a similar 5 games or maybe a 6 game if necessary.
Yeah. Well, I had the Celtics as my preseason prediction to win it all, and they're in pretty good shape. They've got the run there, haven't they? They've got
I've said to you before, Mikey. I think the headlines are going to be Kyrie Irving versus returns to Boston.
It could be, it could be. I kind of don't want that because it's going to just be a bunch of nonsense that I just really kind of don't want to deal with. But yeah, it could be. I mean, I picked Wolves in 7 in that series strictly because they're the higher seeded team, so they'd have home court in Game 7. And I was like, I'm just going to pick them because I really don't know. Those two teams are going to be really close.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Keith, we're going to let you go. We just want to say a huge thank you. For joining us. For those listening, how can everyone follow you and the work that you do?
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter X at Keith Smith NBA. All the work I put together ends up getting posted there. But if you like transactional roster stuff, free agent previews, all that, they're going up on Spot Track, team by team previews. Magic one's not up yet, which is a good thing because we go in order of elimination. So instead of being one of the first, they're going to be in the latter bucket to go up. So that's kind of fun. And then I've also got free agent preview stuff that's been posted, and that's going up as well. And then if you're interested in team previews, although those are up there as well. And then if you really like kind of transaction rumors, once we get into actual signings, breakdowns, all that stuff, NBA front office show, that's my show with Trevor Lane. We do that every day, Monday through Friday. Every Friday is a live show. We have a lot of fun. That's really the fan show to ask us whatever questions they want and get in there. And sometimes it gets a little silly. Sometimes the questions are not all basketball. Sometimes there's Marvel questions get asked in there. Sometimes just general weird life questions. But we have a lot of fun on those Friday live shows.
Who's your favorite Marvel character then, Keith?
I like Captain America. I'm a Captain America guy.
Okay.
I really like him. I'm excited to see. I mean, we can spend another 30 minutes if you want, but I'm really excited seeing what they do with Deadpool in the MCU. Because he's great. He's absolutely hilarious. Wolverine is terrific. I can't wait to see the X-Men fully get in there. But yeah, I'm still not out on Marvel. I know a lot of people are like, I'm done. I fully admit it hasn't been as good, but I'm still really in, and I think they can really turn it around. So I can't wait to see Deadpool and Wolverine, and then what comes on the heels of that.
Wolverine's my favorite, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
You're dressed a bit like Wolverine tonight as well, Gary, but there we go.
I just got out of the gym. I can tell you I'm not built like Wolverine.
Well, he's mostly adamantium. Of course you're not. That's your excuse, right? You have bone and flesh. He's made out of metal, so there it is.
There you go.
Working on it.
Keith, it's been great having you on. Thank you again.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it was great to have Keith join us. Some good insight there, Gary. But before we go, we just want to quickly tell you about today's partner. Are you looking for tickets and hotels for the world's best theme parks and attractions? Then check out Attraction Tickets. They are the UK's #1 attraction ticket provider for Walt Disney World, Universal Studios, SeaWorld, Disneyland Paris, and other popular attractions. They also sell Orlando Magic tickets at competitive prices. So when you're booking your next holiday, use our link in the description to see what they have to offer. You can also visit letstalkmagic.com for all our affiliate links and discount codes, including the NBA store and Fanatics. But Gary, it's been great having you on.
It's been real.
We have a crack, as we always do. But that's going to do it for this week. We are recording our next episode on, I think, Friday the 30th of May next week. So make sure you're subscribed and ready for that one to drop as well. Thank you for listening and watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up and leave us your thoughts and comments. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also like us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at Let's Talk Magic. Sorry, at _ Let's Talk Magic. And until next week, from Gary and me, go Magic.